Welcome to Transform, Tomorrow's Thinking Today, your guide to the way groundbreaking innovation and digital transformation are reshaping our world, from cybersecurity in critical infrastructure to generative AI. Divya Saran takes you beyond the buzzwords, direct to their clients and experts on topics dominating the headlines and derailing boardroom discussions.
When you're building the strategy for how you're going to engage, analytics needs to be in that conversation because you need to build something that can be appropriately analyzed. And that there's often a disconnect in engagement with that.
That's Emily Gallant, Technical Director of Engagement, Innovation and Partnerships at GHD, based in Toronto. Joining Divya and Emily is Daniel Fusca, who's also in Toronto, and they're exploring how technology and AI are transforming the way we engage communities, foster collaboration, and change the future of decision-making. Over to Divya to kick things off.
Welcome to the Transform podcast. Today, we're going to have a really engaging conversation with two engagement practitioners, Emily and Daniel. And really, we're going to unpack how might AI contribute to shaping resilient, future-ready communities, and what opportunities or possibilities can we explore to maximize its impact. So before I get started, I'm going to ask, what is one word to describe your current feelings about the word engagement? So Emily, I'll pass it over to you and then you can pass it to Daniel.
Thanks, Divya. My name is Emily Gallant. I am from Toronto, a longtime engagement practitioner, and have done some work at the macro level of collaboration, being large cities, down to the micro with leadership teams and how, smaller groups engage and progress. Great question. Right now, that's always an evolving answer depending on where you are, I suppose. But right now, I'm feeling like the word is opportunistic. I think we're really on the edge of something pretty amazing in the engagement space that I'm really excited about. And it's so exploratory, and there's so many opportunities to chat about, discuss, try. So I think we're really on the brink of something transformational.
Okay, nice. Daniel.
Hi, thanks for having me here today. My name is Daniel Fusca. I am the manager of Public Consultation in the Parks and Recreation Department at the City of Toronto. So I lead a team of about 14 people, and we design and implement consultation and engagement processes for mostly capital projects, but also other projects that the Parks and Recreation Department is involved in. I also teach at the University of Toronto and Toronto Metropolitan University. I teach engagement. And I am an urbanist in residence this year at the University of Toronto's School of Cities. And my word, I think, is going to be hopeful. I'm hopeful that engagement is evolving in a really positive way towards better enabling citizens and residents to better contribute to government decision-making.
Daniel, could you explain the engagement industry to me, and where does technology and innovation sit in that industry?
Sure. Well, the engagement industry is fundamentally focused on enabling people to be involved meaningfully in decisions that affect them. There are two typical approaches to engagement. There's participatory approaches, which look to involve as many people as possible in sharing their views, their experiences, their ideas. And that's using tools like surveys, polls, open houses, town halls. And it tends to be what some people in the profession refer to as thin engagement, meaning it activates people as individuals, but doesn't necessarily facilitate a conversation. And then there's deliberative engagement, which puts a lot of emphasis on the power of conversation and is more focused on developing like a shared understanding or consensus among participants to help communities really think and decide together. I'm in Canada, and Canada, I think, is a leader in both of these approaches, though participatory engagement is sort of the primary form of engagement that takes place here. And I think that's also the case elsewhere as well. And I think technology in my work has played an increasingly important role in our engagement processes, especially in the last 10 years or so, and really in a very accelerated way since the pandemic. I would say that when I started my career in this field about 15 years ago, we didn't use technology a lot in engagement. A lot of it was all very analog. You might have done a survey, maybe you reached 50 people, but it wasn't really a major part of our processes. Today, we are using technology to help us reach more people in our processes. So again, using tools like survey platforms, social mapping that allows people to put pins and comments on maps, and platforms like Zoom and WebEx. I would also say that the AI boom is having an impact on engagement with new tools that are being released all the time that enable more meaningful virtual conversations or that help us to scale in different engagement in different ways. And my team, we engage a lot of people every year. Last year, we engaged 55,000 people in our work. And most of those people are, in fact, engaged through technology, mostly through standard surveys, but also through other methods. And one of the things that I'm interested in is how we can use technology to move beyond just engaging more people towards actually using it to make engagement more meaningful for the people who are participating.
And so are you using technology right now to analyze that information? That seems like a lot, like going from 50 to 50,000. It's a drastic jump. So do you want to talk a bit about that analytics side? Where do people sit on the analytics side?
I'd like Emily to speak a bit about it too, but it is a challenge for us. And one of the ways that we manage that is not really through AI yet, although sometimes, but is primarily through how we ask questions, right? We try not to ask too many open-ended questions in our surveys because we end up with data that can be very difficult to manage. So coding the data is really important if you're going to understand what people are saying and if you're going to report back to people what you heard. So you got to look at every piece of feedback that you get in a survey. You got to give it a code. You got to give it some theme so that you can then make sense of it later. And so AI does help with that. We've used AI a little bit to help us with that, including GHD's own Unpack. But I would say we're not really at a point where we're using that kind of technology consistently. Where we are using AI a little bit is more in how we engage people.
Emily, do you want to add to that? I think on the consulting side, you're getting multiple perspectives, and I'm sure you're seeing a lot of movement in how AI is enabling community engagement. So I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much going on right now that it is very invigorating and exciting. Because I'm starting to see in the industry this shift towards wanting to do things better and almost like a really palpable desire for organizations to be trying new things, to be exploring AI in pilots, in tests, to really start building their own AI literacy and their comfort with AI. And from an industry standpoint, to Daniel's point of the difference of and the emphasis put on in-person engagement versus online engagement, I just want to echo that. Over the last 10 years, we've seen that. When I first started in engagement, online engagement was like this tiny little sliver of the budget, and maybe we could do something, but it didn't have that much impact. And now we're just seeing that totally flip. Now, lots of valuable room for in-person and the dialogue that you can have with people, the connections you can make, the stories you can hear, like the deep kind of awesome, impactful work that engagement practitioners do will always be the most important. So I'm curious to see how the industry can adopt things like AI or test things like AI, elevate our time spent doing that really deep personal work, because that's why people get into engagement. And so with technology, with the onset of AI, we've seen a real opportunity to use AI in analysis of qualitative feedback. Often engagement strategies across all different types of client types, public and private sector both, tend to defer to quantitative questions, tend to defer to a typical type of survey that I'm sure everyone listening has completed, and there hasn't been innovation there in a significant way. And there's lots of reasons for that, but I see one of the main reasons to deferring to quantitative is really just our inability to analyze qualitative data at scale. And it's perspectives, it's rich, it's lived experience, it's boots on the ground people in communities that are directly impacted by these projects. So it's incredibly rich, valuable data. And it's weird and seems dehumanizing to call it data, but it is actually data once it comes to the practitioners analyzing it, there's always been this elephant in the engagement space on how challenging that point of the engagement process really is. And then it has systemic impacts, right? So our struggles with analyzing data like that at scale, it's felt throughout the decision-making process. Things are themed very high level. Sentiment is positive, negative, neutral, which is not actionable or doesn't provide any insights. And then decision makers are left often with data or information or recommendations that are challenging to defend or are too high level to really impact change. So AI is just such a huge opportunity for us because humans, we read and we forget. When we code, Daniel, like your teams go through all that coding, we read 10 comments, then we read another 10. Our bias is coming into play there, our fatigue, how we're feeling that in that moment. And we forget as humans, we just don't have the human capability to really process data like that at scale. And AI can do that. AI reads and remembers, and it makes connections, and it is so much more valuable. So I think we're at a moment right now where exploration in this space, I think, is required by engagement practitioners. It's not that you need to go and throw all your stuff into Copilot or a publicly available large language model by any means. We wouldn't suggest that. But, where along the engagement spectrum on the process of engagement can we try innovating? Can we try exploring? Because I think we have a duty to do that.
It seems like technology is quite new to the industry, and practitioners have traditional methods of using tech tools like the survey tools or that in-person engagement to really get that in-person discourse, like the emotional sentiment of conversation. Emily, you had some great points about using AI to help reduce human bias and human unconscious bias. So I'd love to know, what are you seeing when you're talking to other individuals?
To answer your question, yeah, it's definitely a mixed bag. Obviously, there's people who are into it and keen to explore on one side and people who are quite resistant on the other, and that's fine, of course. That's not unique to using AI for engagement. That's just AI in general. But what I'm seeing specifically with using AI in analysis of qualitative data, I'm seeing such a reaction that I actually have never seen before in my career. So internally, GHD, the response from people is almost immediate because it's not necessarily just applicable to engagement. It's any type of qualitative data. It's monitoring and evaluation data. It's social science data. It's any organization that has qualitative data of any kind can benefit from exploring what AI can do with it. We had an interesting example where we looked at safety logs for an environment project where normally an incident happens and you fill out a form, and it's important because safety is absolutely critical, especially in engineering. Then there's that section at the end where you add that qualitative data. And so even going into that and pulling out that experience and pulling that sentiment out, and not just the sentiment, but the context of what they're saying, and then looking through, hundreds or thousands of safety logs, what might you learn? So we did a test on that, and it was incredible. So the response I'm seeing is palpable. People have excitement around it. There's lots of questions on, security. What are the security measures? Who owns the data? Where does the data go? Where does it live? All super important questions to be asking. Anyone getting into AI and working on behalf or in service of stakeholders of any kind, they have a duty to be asking those questions and to be building those guardrails from an ethical standpoint as well around how we use it right now and how we don't, considering that it's new. So yeah, the response has been great. I think it's going to impact the entire engagement industry. I think it's going to be disruptive because change is disruptive. But there'll be some challenge in that as well for different types of organizations or practitioners who might not be so AI enabled. I think we're going into a state of disruption. So how are we taking care of the people that are going to feel the impact of that is really, really important.
If I could just add to that, I'm struck by your comment, Emily, that most people at GHD get excited about it. And what I have experienced in the public sector is that people are less excited. They're far more cautious. They really lead into those questions that you identified, Emily, like, is it secure? Do we have to worry about privacy? Is there bias? How are people going to react to the idea of using AI to make sense of their feedback? I think public servants are trained to be a lot more cautious and to see the potential roadblocks to something. And so I think there's a lot of work to be done still in the industry. I agree with Emily. I think it will be disruptive, but I think we have a little bit of ways to go before that's reflected in the way it gets used in the public sector.
And Daniel, like, how are you answering those types of questions, right? Like, as a person that's advocating for technology and innovation, what are the things that help with that dialogue when you're addressing something like ethics or even data ownership or even bias, like unconscious bias that exists in humans and maybe also technology?
Exactly. Look, I'm not an expert in AI. I'm an expert in engagement. So I don't have all the answers. You know, when people are concerned, I think what you just said is absolutely true. Like, there's human bias as well. There's always going to be some form of bias. And I think Emily did a really good job of explaining why human bias can be problematic and the challenges with having humans do some of this work and how things can fall through the crack and be missed or misinterpreted. So there's that piece. When people talk about privacy, you know, and security, I wonder why that is such an important consideration when we're talking about feedback related to how a person wants a park designed. I think it really matters what the subject matter is in relation to how important that question is. So, you know, how I respond depends on the context, but these are some of the arguments that I make.
You know what excites me too about what you just said? Yes, like public sector, a little slower, a little bit more cautious, private, a little bit more gung-ho for different reasons. To me, those are both so valuable, right? Like bringing those public-private partnerships that actually bring both of those very essential perspectives to the table creates the dialogue that is deliberative, so that that sits on, you know, what is the art of the possible and what needs to be considered and what is the current state and what's the future desired state that we want and what needs to be planned and guardrailed and what doors do we need to open to explore along that journey. I think that that is where the power of partnerships is really going to come in to make those sustainable, lasting decisions on projects, but also how to embrace AI. I think that's such a cool opportunity because won't that make the dialogue so much better when you bring those perspectives all into the room to solve one problem? That kind of excites me.
Emily, I have a question for you. How does an AI-enabled community engagement strategy differ from the traditional models? Like, speaking to what you're just saying about public-private partnerships, like, I'd love to know your thoughts on using AI for community engagement.
One thing I'll correct there is for a community engagement strategy to be AI enabled is, I think, maybe the wrong language, because community engagement is enabled by many other things. I think it's an AI supported engagement process. AI is a tool that engagement practitioners are using. So what kind of tools do we have access to? How do we use those? How do we build it into how we collect feedback? How do we build it into how we analyze it? What do we explore? What I've seen just from the analytics component of it is the efficiency and the quality at scale and the consistency in that analysis. It's almost mind-blowing to me because I've never been able to do that or see that as an engagement practitioner in a meaningful way. My experience doing it, which is where the innovation came from, was a project where we got so many comments. We get 10,000 open-ended, amazing, values-based comments back. And I was like, oh man, how am I going to do this justice? And so that's the initial problem it's solving, is the practitioner and our ability to analyze data. But then we've seen, you know, over the past couple of years of doing this, actually how many other systemic impacts it can really have and what it really means to be able to have data-driven, defensible results in an engagement report, where when something is questioned, you can point to data to support it. I just think that's so invigorating, and the possibilities for how we might use that. I'm not saying that AI should run engagement by any means. It is the people who need to run engagement, and how might integration of AI elevate that person's experience of their job, their experience being in the community? How can we use it as a tool to have greater impact?
And so Where do people sit with that? Is it that they're there assigning the themes that inform how the tool is being used? Is it something that you have to do in an iterative approach where, you're going through the process and then you recognize, hey, I need to actually change the way we're tagging all of this information, or the outcome here is quite surprising. Maybe the information was clustered in an interesting way. What are you noticing?
Yeah, I might jump to you, Daniel, in a second, but I will say that it's not often a one person. It should always be more than that. Daniel, I might actually throw to you, even maybe if you think back like 2 years ago, I know you have data scientists even in your team, which I think is probably quite unique to engagement. What was the current state 2 years ago for analysis?
Well, it wasn't that sophisticated, I would say. We would pull up a spreadsheet and every comment would have a theme or a code attached to it, and you go through each comment. It is kind of iterative. So typically the way my team has worked is we would just code as we go. And that became very, very problematic for us recently with a survey that we ran that was quite robust, I will say. We surveyed Torontonians about their feelings about their parks and how they wanted to see parks, overall, our approach to how we build and manage our parks evolve. And so we got a lot of feedback from thousands of people. And that's when Emily and I met, actually. And I was telling Emily about this problem. And that's when she told me about Unpack. So what we had been doing was multiple team members spending hours a day, slowly going through this data and very slowly coding it. And there was just this huge database that was extremely unwieldy. And so we were able to bring GHD on board to help us manage this data. And I think Emily told me while they were sort of looking at the data, that because of the way the survey was designed, it was really because there was a lot of branching in it. So really there were 3,000 surveys in that one survey. So much data. And the way we had coded it, I don't want to say it was a bit of a mess, but because I don't mean to put anyone down, everyone was doing their best. It was just so unwieldy that it was really difficult to take a systematic approach to the coding in a way that really made sense. It was going to take a lot of work to clean up those codes. And then Unpack was able to do that work for us in the span of a week. We gave GHD a week.
For our listeners, Emily, do you want to just briefly talk about what Unpack is?
GHD Unpack is an engagement offering where we go all the way back to what kind of questions are you asking? What's the purpose of that question? What are the objectives of asking that question? What do you actually want to know from it? And is there an opportunity to ask an open-ended question that is going to elicit richer feedback? Because now we have the ability to analyze that type of feedback. And we know that when you ask better quality questions, you get better quality feedback. That's true in one-on-one conversations with people. I'm sure many people can recall a really great conversation that they were a part of, and it probably had some really quality questions in there. So it's also applicable at the macro level. So we started it a couple of years ago. We were piloting it around the world, and it's really just changed my entire perspective on engagement and has brought out that elephant of, oh, wow, this is such a critical part of engagement that, Daniel, you guys aren't the only ones that have that challenge. Everyone in engagement has that challenge globally or had it. So whether you're public, whether you're private, if you collect and look at stakeholder feedback, this challenge is applicable to you. And we try our best in engagement, right? Because it's all we ever knew. It's all we could do to do it manually and do our very best, but it's so labor intensive and costly. So much resources going to that when a lot of engagement practitioners maybe didn't sign up to be in engagement to sit behind Excel sheets, but rather, how might this shift how we allocate our resources so that we can spend more time in the community, building connection, creating dialogue, and take out this relatively flawed process of analytics.
I think that's such a good point. I just want to comment on that point because that's really hitting me. engagement specialists are engagement specialists. We're not data scientists. We would rather be facilitating a conversation, designing a process, than coding data. It's just not our forte. And so that's also why there's just a lot of varied outcomes when it comes to how data gets coded. It's sometimes done successfully and sometimes it's done less successfully, because that's just not what we're actually trained to do. This very little time devoted, maybe none, in my education was devoted to how you code survey data.
Same.
Right? So that's something you figure out on your own. I mean, I teach it a bit in my class, but to be honest, it's not something that I'm even that interested in doing myself.
And data scientists love it.
They love it. Yeah.
There are people out there that love it. They love it. So I was going to ask, does that mean engagement for tomorrow? What does the time dial look like? Are engagement practitioners, engagement specialists, are they getting that time back to do the thing that they love with technology? And Daniel, going back to this survey, were you able to learn from the output to redesign better surveys? What does that look like?
We're in a process of learning. And to be honest, I haven't spent much time with the outcomes of the work that Emily's team has done.
You went on vacation real quick.
I went on vacation, to be fair. That's true. I've been away for a while. And I'm the manager of the team, so I don't always get super involved in the weeds of the projects. But we do always try to learn something from every experience. We definitely learned something about the complexity of that survey, about open-ended questions and the challenge with open-ended questions, and when it's best to ask them and when it's not, and of the value of these tools to help us do all that work better. So maybe if we chatted again in a year, I'd be able to answer that question better. But, we will definitely be thinking about it, and we absolutely will be tweaking our approach in order to not face those same challenges again, or to be able to face them in a better way.
To build on that too, we're exploring too, right? Everybody is. There's no absolute expert in this field. There's just people who are trying and have been trying for a certain amount of time and trying in unique ways. When it comes to surveys, what I've explored through this whole process and working with data scientists and teams and really trying to get reflective and provoke thoughts within us about how deep and meaningful this could be and what it could be. What I've come to realize is that survey design, I think, really needs to be innovated. It's the same way it's been since surveys really came out. Now you can branch surveys and you could do some things with it. But I think the social science and behind surveys and how people take them and what is the best approach for different types of groups. I know, Daniel, you guys had a long option and a short option. I think there's so much possibility to change for the better how surveys are constructed. And the analytics, how you're going to analyze the data, needs to be at that point in the conversation. When you're building the strategy for how you're going to engage, analytics needs to be in that conversation, because you need to build something that can be appropriately analyzed. And that there's often a disconnect in engagement with that. So I think there's a lot of potential, of course. And I think we just have such an opportunity to harness data science and decision science and survey science to really elevate engagement in a way that has a more direct impact on the decisions that are being made. That's what I want the future to look like, is engagement is valuable without question. Sometimes now there's questions around how valuable it is in certain circumstances. And I think we have an opportunity to do that.
I'd love to see this conversation a year from now,
We should come back. But I would add to that. I totally agree with that comment, Emily. And, I think when we talk about engagement tomorrow, for me, technology is a part of that conversation. It's certainly not all of it. It's not even necessarily the most important part of it. I think how we approach engagement is changing. I think it needs to change more. I think engagement needs to become more embedded. I think it needs to become more deliberative. As I talked about earlier, I think it needs to become more co-creative. We need to establish stronger feedback loops where we kind of share back what we heard with people. And I think increasingly engagement tomorrow will be supported by technology such as AI tools that help us to scale engagement in different ways, like helping us to synthesize conversations or visualize patterns, but also in a lot of different ways as well. And I was talking to Emily earlier today about this paper put out by this organization that I've done some work with called Democracy Next, called 5 Dimensions of Scaling Democratic Deliberation with and Beyond AI. One is scaling out. So that's about using AI to increase the number of people who are participating in deliberative processes. And remember, that means like conversation-based processes. Scaling up. So using technology to facilitate deliberation happening at higher levels of governance, like national and transnational levels of governance. Scaling across. So using AI to increase the number of deliberative processes in government and other institutions. Scaling deep, which is about using AI to increase the impact of deliberation by institutionalizing it. And then scaling in, which is about actually increasing the quality of the deliberation when it's happening. So I'm most interested in the promise of scaling across. So I would love to see more deliberative engagement processes happening all across society. I would like to see AI help us to scale deep so that we can adopt these tools more effectively as institutions, and then scaling in so that we can improve the quality of deliberation. So how does AI do all that stuff? I have no idea. I mean, I have a little bit of an idea.
Yeah.
But I'm interested in learning. I have an open mind.
Daniel, is that all a part of deliberative dialogue? I know that's something that you specialize in. And so I actually want to ask, like, what is it? Why is it important? And how might AI enhance it? But I think you might have just started on that train.
I might have just answered it.
You already answered that question.
Well, we can talk a little bit more about like what it is.
Sure, yeah.
So it's basically like thoughtful discussion that's aimed at making well-informed decisions together. So in a deliberative process, you get people to talk to one another. And what's important in a deliberative process isn't really what each individual wants, which is what's important when you're surveying people, for example, right? When you're doing a participatory process, it's actually what the group can move forward with together, right? What the group feels comfortable moving forward with together. And so in a deliberative process, you ask people to listen to different perspectives with an open mind, to ask questions of other people, to share their views, to share their lived experience, to weigh trade-offs, focus on the common good, and build off each other's ideas. And these processes are typically focused on a few key principles. One is representative participation. So in a deliberative process, you try to bring together a group that looks as much as possible like the people who are going to be impacted by a decision. And one of the ways we do that is through civic lotteries, where people volunteer to participate. They fill out a survey of their demographics. We've already done some research to determine what the demographic makeup of the group should look like based on, again, what the community looks like, what the demographics of the community are. And then you pick people randomly, but you control for those demographics. By the way, AI can help with that as well, and it is used in that way. You want to make sure that the group will have a meaningful influence on a process. To do that, they need a clear purpose and mandate. They need a lot of clarity as to what exactly their role is in the overall process. You need to give them a lot of information so that they can really make sense of what they're being asked and make an informed decision. You need to give them time to have those conversations. Often you ask the participants in the process to develop the reports themselves, or at least to have a say in those reports once they've been developed. You want to be transparent as much as possible with the wider public so they know what's happening if they want to. And oftentimes also people will point to the need for independent facilitation. So people who are not associated with the sponsoring organization running those processes, although that's not principle that we adhere to in Parks and Rec. We're trying to be as innovative and sort of forward thinking as possible. And so we, as an engagement team, act as this kind of independent group from the rest of the division while still being embedded in it. And that's kind of how we describe it. So all that to say that I think that this is the future of engagement, is these kinds of processes where you're actually having people talk to one another, because we don't know how to talk to one another anymore.
That's so interesting. Yeah, that is crazy, because that is like your field.
Yeah.
I'm just sitting here like, yes, I literally had to make a noise for you to like know my agreement with that, because we see that in organizations too. And I've seen that over the past couple of years in my previous role working with leadership teams. Leadership teams make decisions. They collect information. They understand what's going on in an organization. They deliberate. But what is that deliberative process look like? What's that decision-making process look like for different types of decisions? I've been entrenched in work internally inside organizations in the past couple of years, seeing what kind of engagement techniques from public engagement can we pull into an organization, because an organization is inherently a community of people. There's lots of literature about that, about what if you treat an organization like you would treat a community, what might that look like? So things like deliberative dialogue, Daniel, like really pique my interest, because it's not only applicable to macro collaboration and macro engagement, but also micro around the boardroom table or in a workshop with different technical experts, trying to come up with a path forward. And I see it all the time. People struggle in those environments because they're tricky. Deliberative dialogue and figuring things out and perspectives coming to the table and opinions and sometimes for sure emotions. It's a people process. Business is people. So I'm really keen. I think it'd be very cool to take the deliberative dialogue process that you're exploring there, Daniel, and see what it can do at the boardroom table.
For sure.
It's interesting. As much as this conversation was about technology and AI, it felt more about culture change and just understanding what processes we could put in place that can be enabled by technology. So I like that we deep dived into that element of even microcultures and microprocesses. So I wanted to get closing remarks. What do you both hope to see in the future? We talked a little bit about the future, but anything that you wanted to add for closing?
Yeah, I'll just say, that I have a lot of hope that we can harness AI and other technological tools to scale up, to make these conversations more regular, to make them happening more often, to make them more meaningful.
I could not agree more. I just think stakeholder perspectives can sometimes be seen as a risk. A lot of people see stakeholders as a risk. It's very common, very common. And I really think that's the wrong mindset. I think if we go into engagement with the mindset of, I'm going to mitigate this risk, or I'm going to manage these stakeholders and control it, I think it's the wrong mindset. Risk mitigation might be an output of a really powerful engagement strategy. But the mindset I think that we need to go into engagement with is stakeholder perspectives are an asset to harness. And if we can harness them well and we can create the right dialogue and we can understand their feedback at scale, I think we have the potential to really make changes that I almost can't even imagine.
Would you change your word now that we're at the end of this conversation? So are you still hopeful and optimistic, or are you just curious?
I think I'm both.
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think curious is actually a great word.
It's very hopeful to be curious, isn't it?
It's a great way to take on a new adventure. Thank you both so much. It was such a delightful conversation, and I hope we revisit this in 1 year where all of our 1-year predictions come true. And thank you so much.
Look forward to it. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Divya.
You've been listening to Transform, Tomorrow's Thinking Today, a podcast for GHD produced by Sound Cartel. Follow Transform free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.